Hello everyone, welcome to Tea with TPS, an informal chat with thought leaders in India and abroad. Today we have Mr. CMA Nayar, a former Vice President of Alsthom Paris and former board member of Alsthom T&D India. He is a keen observer of international relations and writes regularly. He has been taking a particular interest in climate change negotiations right from the beginning. So today our topic is the outcome of the COP26, which is concluding today in Glasgow. So let us ask an expert as to what it all amounts to. Is it going to bring us to the dream world of not above 1.5 degrees Celsius? Or is it going to be yet another effort which may not result in any major achievement? Let us find out that. Welcome, CM.
Thank you, Steve Srinivasan.
Well, we have been watching Glasgow and before that Rome, where the C20 also discussed most of these things. So it was very clear from the beginning, after President Biden took over, that he is wanting an alternative to the Paris Agreement, which has not been effective. So he started this new adventure of asking every country to declare a net zero emission year. And he himself has declared 2030 for the United States. So this is a game changer, because so far we have been talking about reduction of emissions under the Rio Agreement reduction, mandatory reduction for developed countries, but developing countries are allowed to increase their emissions for the sake of development. Then we came to Paris, where it changed to voluntary cuts of emissions. And now we are moving away from the focus on cuts of emissions, but on the net effect of emissions as well as sinks. So in a sense, the responsibility of deciding what kind of mix that the countries want to adopt is left to them. But the objective is the same old one of keeping the global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what exactly has been achieved in Glasgow, according to you?
There are several issues in the whole subject. The fact is that the climate is changing. There is no doubt about it. There is also a sudden global warming. And the main difficulty here is the assumptions that the climate is changing because of this global warming is perhaps not true, because there are several factors which influence the climate change. The solar irradiance, the distance of the sun from the earth system, that is relative, the black spots on the sun, and there are several things which actually influence the climate change. And the assumption that we will solve all these issues by controlling global warming is probably fundamentally flawed. And there is yet another issue, the correlation between the NDCs submitted by the individual nations and the announcement that 1.5 to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees should be obtained by this is also fundamentally flawed. Because if you add up all the NDCs, which in fact are the commitments from the nation's point of view, if everybody had achieved the NDCs, which is not the case, we would have possibly reached around 4 degrees.
Right.
So this to say that the nations have committed NDCs and this incidentally is equal to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees is wrong. So therefore, there are a number of issues which are not basically coherent. And in that situation, to say that we will control the climate by simply controlling the emission is not really correct. No doubt, the emissions will have to be controlled. At the same time, there has to be also several other issues like how exactly we can remove the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or even from the sea, and how exactly we can control the concentration of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which should basically be the factor which should be analyzed. Unfortunately, there is no.
With that objective, the present trend of declaring this net carbon-free emission, is it going to be more effective than nationally determined commitments?
The commitments, I think, as far as nations are concerned, it is all the commitment what matters. No nation says that if I reach the full level of commitment, it will be 2 degrees. Unfortunately, that was written down in the agreement like that. The clause 2 of the agreement says it is 2 degrees, and clause 3 says it is NDC. And it is a well-known international practice that if there is a contradiction in two clauses in the same agreement, what will be binding will be what is bound by the client. And here, as far as the individual nations are concerned, what is binding is the NDC. Sadly, what was committed in 2015 in Paris, almost all the nations have not honored that. Or rather, they are not in the track to honor that for the year 2030. It includes the United States and EU and many, many nations. India is perhaps one of the few who has been in the right track to achieve the commitments that has been made in 2015. So therefore, there is a problem of meeting the commitment. There is a problem, even if the commitments are met, there is a problem of meeting the target of 2 degrees. So in other words, in my assessment, we will never be able to reach a level of 2 degrees with the type of actions that we are taking now.
Well,
Now, if you assume that the CO2 pardon?
after all these years have been declared,
And actually, to tell you frankly, it is an intellectual dishonesty. You say, you tell the clients, or rather the individual nations, you do this or this is what we can do, you accept it, and then say somebody else saying in the name of science and other things, political statement saying that if you add up all these things, it will be 2 degrees, and this is absolutely wrong. They had the means to calculate it. Scientists have the means to calculate it, but it is a deliberate attempt to distort facts. And this is what I call an intellectual dishonesty.
no, but
And now it comes it's being discussed now.
if the danger is real, if the danger is real of the planet being destroyed by these developments, then what is the benefit you are getting by having these false expectations?
Now the question is about the planet, and everybody will agree that we should work for sustainable development to maintain a certain level of sustainability as far as our life is concerned. Everybody will agree to that. But to say that if you reduce the emissions, you will be able to achieve that is wrong. But on the contrary, if these people who are saying that by reducing the CO2 emission and incidentally by reducing the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which may be true, which may not be true, but if it is an assumption on which they are working, in that case, their priority should be to remove the carbon from the atmosphere. And in 1990, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere was 353 ppm. Now, if they are convinced that this is the way to do to save the planet, then they should make an engagement saying we will take actions to remove the CO2 from the atmosphere. Simultaneously, we will also reduce the emissions. Evidently, we have to do that. And then, if we will achieve, let us say, 353 ppm in 2050, the planet will be in the same conditions as in 1990, if they believe so. But even if you achieve this 353 ppm in 2050, I am of the view climate will continue to change. The reason being, their argument that the climate change is uniquely related to this is wrong. So therefore, whatever you do with respect to the emission of CO2, absorption of CO2, you will come to a situation we will always have climate change. So this is the reality.
Okay.
Now, how do we move forward? Simultaneously, a lot of attempts are being made for capturing carbon from the atmosphere as well as from the sea, and capturing carbon from the industrial operations, that is carbon capture and storage. And there are also attempts being made to convert the CO2 into other useful products like ammonia, carbonates, and even hydrocarbon. And these type of attempts should be continued. And if that type of an approach is taken, you are taking a more positive step than saying that if everybody reduces the CO2 emission, everything will be all right. In fact, everything will not be all right. And there is also another aspect. They are talking about 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, etc. What is this 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees? They are saying that is the global average of increase in temperature. What is this global average? The world is divided, including Earth and surface, sea, into 2,592 segments. And at different points, the temperatures are taken. Daily averages of the temperatures are taken, and then they take that on the overall average for the 365 days for the world as a whole. In my opinion, this figure indicates nothing, because the indication, this type of an assessment should be made region by region. I will ask a question now. There is at any point of time, there is about 50 degrees difference between the temperature in, if you take two extreme cases, that is the place coldest and the hottest, there could be, the difference could be as much as 50 degrees. What is the situation if a 2-degree temperature comes in the coldest spot? And what is the situation in, so the temperature goes up by 2 degrees in the hottest spot? If somebody says it is the same, I think he is not understanding science. So therefore, all these aspects which have been creating a smoke screen for pushing people to extremes which cannot be achieved. And ultimately, you put people in defense, and you will never get the best out of people if you put them in defense. And India cleverly did that in the sense we tried to project a pathway in which we want to do things. And therefore, we are saying this is what we have committed and we have what we have done. And India's commitment, even in this Glasgow, is reasonable, although a little ambitious. In the case of 50% of the energy by 2030 is a little ambitious, but we can attempt to do that. By and large, India is likely to honor the promise made in 2015 as well as the promise made in 2021.
No,
This is my view.
CMA, before we
Yeah.
go to India's commitments, let us get one thing clear. My understanding is that, of course, ideal situation is to have technology to remove, CO2 emissions from the atmosphere, and but that time has not come yet. Technology is not yet, and these are all possible. But what they are trying to do here, the difference between, say, Paris Agreement and here is that the focus has been shifted slightly away from reduction of emissions. There is a composite thing, that is, you reduce emissions and also try to neutralize the emissions. And this was never mentioned in earlier agreements.
Right.
We're talking about reduction of emissions. So I find that much is a little bit of a progress. But certainly what you say is right. The eventual solution has to be technological, because
Right.
people are not going to change their lifestyles. That is clear. But do you see this difference between Paris Agreement and Glasgow, that the focus has shifted from, because it is left to the country, you can produce as much emissions as you want, provided you are able to neutralize it.
Right. That is correct.
And that's a shift, isn't it?
No, but the point, yes, of course, it is a shift. That is carbon capture and storage, which has become a part of this agreement, which was not the case in the previous agreement. That is right.
Yeah.
And that is, of course, it has been done for a different reason, as my understanding goes, because all these discussions that were going on, saying that we will be able to abandon fossil fuel by 2050, that is the type of commitments that have been made by both Europe and United States. Europe with calculation, United States without calculation. And now Europe has found that it is not possible. Factually, they have found it is not possible. So what they are trying to say is, we will not use coal because they don't have much coal. Actually, their use of coal is far less than the coal of many other countries or group of countries, and they will have to use gas. Now, if we use gas, then naturally the only way to respect the situation of CO2 is to absorb the gas. That is, the CO2 has to be absorbed through carbon capture and absorption or conversion. They are trying both. Now, clarify a point which you said earlier. Actually, technology exists for capture and conversion of CO2 even now. But the
Yeah.
point is whether it can be scaled up to meet the requirement that we need. Firstly, to remove the carbon that is existing in the atmosphere and in the sea, and secondly, to remove all the carbon that will be generated from the actual activities.
No, which
But
means CMA.
in the name of technology, it is available already.
No. What I'm saying is that that is where the financial issue comes up.
Correct.
Even if the technology is available, developing countries are in no position to make use of the technology. And
Right.
that's why this whole thing has become conditional. But what do you think? Why this change? Why was this change brought about by US? Maybe in consultation with China, I suspect. Like in the case of Paris Agreement, also it was a secret understanding between China and the United States. So this time also, the alacrity with which China declared 2060 shows that there has been some kind of understanding between these two biggest emitters. Do you think it is possible?
I'm not really sure, but all that I know for certain is that Europe has been working on this for quite some time, Europe collectively, and that is why they brought in the notion of encouraging nuclear energy and the carbon capture and storage into the picture about 6 months back.
And also forestry. Forest was emphasized.
Pardon me?
No, forestry. A forestry
Right,
conversion.
right. Forestry, of course, is a subject that everybody is talking about. It is something which has to be done also. But forestry alone cannot produce the results that we are looking for. Only thing is, it can decrease the situation, rather, it can reduce the global warming aspect of the situation by maintaining the forest level. But it cannot actually remove all the things that we have, actually, the CO2. So forestry is something which everybody agrees. But the point is, this is also something. This is relative. Everybody does not have the same problem. See, what is in Amazon forest is not necessarily the situation in the forest in Europe or in India, and therefore it also has to be relative, but it has to be done.
Right. So the new situation is in such a way that countries can take initiatives. But that is where the issue of two things, technology and funding, arises. And this
Correct.
is an issue which we have been tackling since 1992.
Correct.
Amounts of money was pledged, but nothing happened. No money came.
Right.
And that's
Right.
why then Paris it shifted. But now the focus has come back to the original question of funding, because even if you are willing to try and reduce your emissions, that's not enough to neutralize.
Right.
Cost is in neutralization. And when you say forestry, that is a trick by the developed countries to invite
Correct.
developing countries more and more into this. As a
Correct. Correct.
which means you stop industrialization and keep your forests, and that will solve the problem. And this we have been facing from Rio. Rio itself is
Absolutely.
for a forestry convention, and
Absolutely.
that was the environmental colonialism. They are saying that what you have, you keep, don't destroy it, which means
Right.
develop, and that
Right.
stage is over. So that is why this question of commitments are now conditional to funding. And therefore, we are back to square one. This is the point.
Right. Right. But there again, about the funding, you will have to recognize one simple fact. The agreement that was in Paris was $100 billion a year from 2020 onwards by the developed nation, but they have not done that.
Yeah,
And to think that they will do that now, actually, we are just imagining something which is almost impossible. Because the financial situations in these countries are so bad that the political reactions and the resistance of the population of these countries contributing for something else, for some other country, for whatever reason, it is something which, of course, will not get political traction. And all these politicians are there for continuing in power or getting power from the other. And now, politically, it is a very delicate situation to take a strong position on this because it will actually erode your political base. And every politician would like to continue, if it is possible, And the next one who comes may change it as well, as just been done by Trump. So therefore, all these agreements of an increased commitment for increased financing from the nations is not possible. But there is an interesting development, I must, which is actually an interesting development in this meeting. They are now trying to bring in investors. They are trying to bring in banks, not necessarily the development banks, also investing banks. And they are trying to present a business scenario that the future of business is going to be like this, which is probably true. And if the future of business is going to be like this, where you have to take actions for containing these type of environmental issues, investment will have to be made for a new way of functioning. And that new way of functioning might also mean that the cost of products will go up. Because effectively, we have to take into account the entire full cost in calculating the cost of products. That is not happening. That is what is called life cycle cost. And the cost of every product which you are selling in the market should take into account the cost of management of the end of life of the product, which is not there as an obligation. But it will come as an obligation. That is what is polluter pays. That is the old logic that it was there. And now, if the business model is going to change, I think they have been trying to convince the investors. And in my understanding, looking at the different webinars which I participated, many investors seem to be convinced that the business model is going to change.
No, but CMA, is this a new thing? It is not. Because carbon trading was discussed as early as in 1995.
Right.
They had also this idea of, say, one country reducing emissions in another country and getting credit for it. But all this did not work because that business model of countries being able to reduce emissions elsewhere by investment. And that was the theory that we were discussing in Berlin in 1995, remember. So we told them that we have no objection to that, provided we are not expected to undertake commitments. That's how we
Right.
the issue.
Right.
Whether this new proposal that you are talking about, is it different from the carbon trading idea?
It is different. It is different. In the sense, one point which is different is, at least in Europe, there is a new notion of carbon trading. Europe is not really trying to buy carbon credit from outside. Europe is actually trying to introduce what is called a carbon tax within, so that you will start reducing the use of carbon, rather fossil fuel.
They have but it has not never been used by anybody. There is no carbon tax so far, right?
There is. At least I know that in both Germany and in France there is carbon tax.
I see.
And that is what the European Union is trying to say, saying that we will control these fossil fuel by applying what is called carbon tax for the fossil fuel, which in turn will increase the cost because the fossil fuel cost will go up. And this is what Europe is betting on, so that by trying to put people, the business community, passing on a message saying that your operation using cheap fossil fuel will become more expensive and therefore you shift from that. This is the approach that they are taking. And they have also said, I think it is EU Parliament has already passed, that the commodities coming from countries which are not respecting all these rules, they will have what is called a carbon adjustment mechanism in frontier, which is in fact a duty. They are trying to put that. So that is going on. But the latest emphasis which I see what is happening in Germany particularly, which will happen in other European countries because most of them follow Germany in this, they are thinking about carbon capture and conversion, and they are also planning to use gas even after 2050. In my assessment, the question of a situation anywhere in the world without using at least gas in 2050 does not exist. It will be there. So the logic that they are bringing in is, if we use gas and if we capture the carbon, it is green, which is logically correct. So the question that is posed to them is, if that is true, if you use coal, And if you capture the CO2, that's also green. But they are not willing to accept that for the time being. But I think that will be accepted. So therefore, a lot of things are taking place in this. But you must also understand the to present to you the fallacy of this 2050 net zero. Today, if you take Europe, which is far advanced than the United States in these things, 71% of the total energy consumption, which includes all types of energy, fuel oil, everything, and electricity, is from fossil fuel in 2020. And they say that in 30 years they will they will come to zero. This is not imaginable. It's not possible.
No.
So therefore, when you say that you will move from 71% to 0%, no person who understands these things will agree to that.
No,
And
that they place emphasis on naming these years. Which country among them who have named these years is likely to fulfill it, in your opinion?
in Europe, the country, there are two countries which can fulfill more or less. I'm talking about big countries. Small countries like Denmark and all that might reach. But the big countries which are likely to reach, rather, France is likely to reach. I am sure it will reach. Because the position has been given, the president has already announced the taking up of new nuclear power plants. They have already announced that.
No.
And France has also said that 100% of the cars will be electric cars.
What France will do is to step up nuclear production, nuclear energy.
Yes, it is.
That
It is.
power is clean, and France has always been, 85% of their energy used to be
Right.
from.
Now, there was resistance in France for building new power plants, nuclear power plants.
Right.
But that is going away now.
No, now the Fukushima fear is now disappearing slowly, isn't it?
Probably, and also this carbon fear is more predominant than anything else now. That is also one reason. But to answer your question, the country which is working it out diligently is Germany. Because on Germany's situation, they can, I mean, we don't know what is going to happen, but this is my assessment. Germany has already announced that they will close down the remaining 8 nuclear power plants. And they will do that. They have no choice because the Greens are likely to come into power, and therefore the nuclear power plants are not likely to be reopened, or it will be closed.
Yeah, they have never opened it.
It will never open. It will be closed.
Yeah.
But the presence of FDP in the probable new government is a business pro business political party. Is actually gas should be considered as green if there is actually carbon capture. That is their position. So Germany working out is actually very different from the way others are doing. And that is one of the reasons why they contract for the Nord Stream 2, etc., for getting gas from Russia, because they always knew that they need gas. So that will happen. But the important thing that Germany has done is actually the most difficult part to remove the fossil fuel in any system, business system, is industrial applications. That is the most difficult part. So what they have done is they are trying to replace it's an advanced stage, I must say. They are trying to replace the fossil fuel. When you say fossil fuel, it can be gas or furnace oil. This is mostly used in the industries. They are trying to replace it with hydrogen. So that is a project that is well in advance. It is advancing very well. So their plan is for the industries to provide liquefied hydrogen like gas. And they have entrusted that work in a first effort. The biggest electric transmission company, that is RWE, has been assigned this job of working out a program for supplying hydrogen to these industrial applications.
India is also trying to introduce.
India is also trying, but I must caution one thing, that hydrogen is actually an energy carrier, like electricity. It is not a source of energy, like coal or gas or anything. So it is a carrier of energy. So if you use methane or electricity to produce hydrogen, there is already a loss. That is to say, from the solar or wind power, you make hydrogen, means there is already a loss because of the loss of efficiency. And if you have to convert this back into energy, there is again another loss. So the loss is enormous in this. But for practical reasons, they might do it. But there is also one another big problem.
So
The
now
solar
you
and
cannot replace
wind,
any of these with hydrogen. My understanding
pardon me,
is that hydrogen will become a source of energy. It is not, you say.
it is not a source of energy, it is a carrier of energy. Source is something else.
It cannot replace the energy sources.
Yeah, it cannot, right. So this is another good development, actually.
Right.
But to say that hydrogen will solve the problem is wrong.
Okay.
Because the logic principle is this: if you can manage something using electricity, you should not use hydrogen because electricity will be more efficient.
Right.
So if you use hydrogen, it is because you have no choice. And if you use hydrogen to replace fossil fuel, because that is what you have committed. So even if considering the loss of efficiency and the cost. And there is also another thing which is actually exaggerated in the whole world, that we can have green hydrogen using solar and wind by electrolysis. But electrolysis is a 24-hour process. So you get it only for a very short period. In fact, the energy requirement you get is comparatively small. In Europe, you might get 3 or 4 kilowatt hour per day, something like that. So electrolysis is actually expensive equipment now, but it will come down afterwards. Now, the trade-off will be full utilization of the electrolyzer or part utilization of the electrolyzer, and this is a choice they have to make. So if they have to use solar energy, in my opinion, the only thing that will be possible is they will have to pump in that solar and wind energy into the system, grid system, and draw the energy for 24 hours of operation of the electrolyzers. But nobody is talking about it now, but it will come out as an issue soon.
But that means they have to redesign the industrial plants.
They have to redesign to some extent the burning system, etc. They have to redesign. That is for hydrogen.
Okay.
That is for hydrogen, because if hydrogen is not going to be produced everywhere, it will be produced in a few places. Now, the place where they make the hydrogen, either by methane, steam methane reforming, which is the process now. But I will give you a figure. There are 75 million tons of hydrogen that is produced now in the world, mainly for oil industry. That is all made by steam methane reforming, that is using methane. And that 75 million tons of hydrogen produced actually emits 890 million tons of CO2.
I see. Mm.
So that has to be captured. So these are all the realities of the situation. And if you go for electrolysis, yes, there will not be any emission of CO2. But at the same time, you will have to use a stable power, that is to say a thermal power or a nuclear power, along the solar energy. And then you can what is called the green hydrogen. These are the realities.
Okay. Apart from this, their own efforts to do things in their own countries, there were some efforts in Glasgow of countries getting together and making declarations, like about methane, like about not investing in fuel, then not investing in development of coal. These measures being taken by some countries, is it going to be of any use?
It is going to be.
Is it going to be of any use by doing this?
Now, I think the methane, containing methane emission is something promoted by US. And in fact, US is probably the biggest emitter of methane. I think the purpose of promoting this notion now is actually to change the focus. Because methane is actually 1 ton to the, sorry, 10, that is 10 billion tons roughly. That is one-fifth of the CO2 emission now is from methane. But nobody was talking about it till now. Why? Because it is oil industry behind it. The methane leak is mostly coming from oil industries
Is it
and
true?
the animals.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the animals, and then
And
it is again directed towards developing countries that you have large number of animals who are not productive, but at the same time
No, but these type of things will not work because nobody can tell another country that you reduce the number of animals, but it's not possible. But if at all somebody has to ask, it is the developing nations. You are the developed nations because they are eating so many animals.
Right.
That is not going to take place. But one more point which I want to highlight for the information of the general public. See, when we are trying to reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere, it is related to production. But to say that today's situation, if you take the total energy that is consumed by India, it is about, uh, if I put it in megawatt hour, it is about 7,000 megawatt hour, something million megawatt hour, something like that. Now, the ratio between the total energy consumption in India and Europe is almost 6 per capita. So Europe is consuming 6 times per capita than India. And US
more. US may be even more.
1.8 times Europe. So therefore, in all these discussions, nobody is talking about reducing the per capita consumption of energy by any of these countries.
Yes, but our Prime Minister keeps talking about changing lifestyles in development.
Get away with this.
Yeah.
In even IES report, which I studied, shows that. Because any responsible organization making such a report should say that the developed nations should either remain contain or reduce their consumption, but they are projecting an increased consumption. So these are all the discrepancies in the whole argument. And to put it in a nutshell, I must say this is an attempt by the developed nations to bulldoze the developing nations for maintaining their level of living by depriving the people in the developing nations what they should really have.
No, this is the truth right from the beginning. What they started in
Just,
Stockholm and then amended in Rio de Janeiro, then Paris. But eventually, it is environmental colonialism. There is no question.
yes,
Anyway,
it is.
coming to our own position, India has
Yes,
two kinds of commitments. One, four commitments for 2030, and one big commitment for 2070.
right.
And it made big news because we had said earlier that we will not accept any year, etc., etc.
Right, right.
But my first question is, why is it that we decided to declare it? And then taking it away with the left hand, what you have given with the right hand, saying that this is all subject to you are giving us $1 trillion. So we are back to
Right.
one.
Now, this is what India has said.
Yeah.
That is to say that we need 1 trillion finance for this. This is what India has said.
Yeah.
But personally, I think that is an argument, but India will do even without this 1 trillion. We will mobilize the 1 trillion from within.
Even the 2030 targets?
2030 targets.
The four of them.
Because hoping to get it from outside is not possible. So therefore, when I say from within, it could be a bilateral financing on the basis of some agreement, or probably mobilizing the industry support in India, because they are trying to, the government cannot do it, that is sure. That is, they are trying to put the private organizations mobilize these resources from different places in their own capacity. My own personal belief is this 5,000 megawatt requires actually major investment is 5,000 megawatt of renewable power. And that is a little tough target, but I think we will try to find a solution to reach at least almost near that figure by 2030. It's about 45,000 megawatt of renewable power installed every year, which is very high. But they have to find the ways to do that. That is what I think. I am quite optimistic that India, even with this increased the commitment, which appears to be an increased commitment, which is really in some extent, but the presentation has made it really big, and we are likely to achieve that in 2030.
No, but by saying that we will be able to do it only if there is so much money, and specifically mentioning the amount,
Right.
haven't we taken away the spirit of that commitment?
Not really. I think it is a political statement saying that you are preparing the grounds for a probable non-achievement of this in 2030, probably. So I think it's a political statement.
Yeah, and initially having given a different message altogether that we are not going to accept these. So we are putting, throwing the ball into their court again. That we are
Correct.
going to do, we will do whatever is within our capacity. And these are the things
Right.
we were saying everywhere, even before also. We are
Right. Right.
here and we will do whatever is in our capacity. But
Correct.
if one country does not do it, the whole world will suffer. And therefore, there is an imperative for international cooperation, technology, and financing. So it is.
Once again, that is one country means which is that country you're talking about? India.
No, no, no. Any country. This is like poverty is indivisible. No, if there is pollution in one place, other
Oh
place
yes. Oh yes.
doesn't help. There
Oh
are no
yes.
borders. If there are no borders, everybody has a liability to help each other,
Right.
and that's
Right.
what we are emphasizing. But
Right.
but is there an implication here that regardless of whatever we may get or not get, we'll move forward with these objectives, and that is
I think so. I think so. Personally, I think so. Because this is the spirit in which these documents have been prepared, in my view. And in the argument was presented by the Prime Minister to support and continue to insist that financing is needed. Financing is needed, no doubt about that. But hoping to get that finance from the developed nation is actually it's a hope against hope. It
yes.
will not happen. Investors may do it.
No, then what happens to the world? That's
That
the
is what.
So that's because Mrs. Gandhi herself said in 72 that money is the fact. You have to pay for polluters have to pay.
Yes.
And they never did that. They promised a
They
huge
never.
money,
They,
Rio de Janeiro,
they,
then 100 billion Paris. And now if you say 1 trillion, they will immediately run away from the place. I'm going to.
no, but I think it's not tactical moves. But frankly speaking, this 2050 will never happen. The fossil fuel free 2050 will never happen.
But we are saying
And
2070.
pardon me,
We are saying 2070, not 50.
70, no, I think that's also a political statement. We could have possibly said nothing, and in that case, everybody would have said you are not committing anything. The 2070 for me is a political statement, knowing fully well many things will change before that. And in my opinion, even before 2050, many things will change drastically. And all these things, all what we are talking now, will have a totally different dimension within a couple of decades. So
Okay.
2070 is again a political statement, in my view.
Okay, finally, CMA, what is the Chinese game? Why is it that they did not participate in Glasgow? Number one. Secondly, they had declared 2060 already. So they had really something to offer to the world to come and say 2060 we are offering. So
Now,
let me complete.
my
After
sorry,
that, today there is a declaration that we will cooperate with the United States. They are
yes,
not saying that they will cooperate with others. What
right.
is the meaning of that? So they are going to have a bilateral deal on this. Is that the intention? And maybe that intention was established already when John Kerry went to Beijing. They probably already had this agreement that we will say 2050, you say 2060, and then we will work out among ourselves and leave the developing countries out of these calculations. Is that the plan?
I'm not sure, but I have different points of view on the different questions that you raise. The first is why President Xi Jinping did not participate in these meetings.
Yes.
That I think is really political because he cannot afford to be away from there when such an important plenum meeting is taking place there, and therefore that was not possible. And the second thing, probably relating to this, today he is in a position to talk more affirmatively, possibly because we don't know the truth, possibly because he has reinforced his position. Every indication is that he has reinforced his position. That is probably one reason. The other is the agreement between US and China may have nothing to do with this. It may be related to their relations in the Far East.
No,
Because on the climate.
on climate change, they said we will cooperate with the United States.
Yes, cooperate actually is a general term, and in China's case, there is nothing to cooperate with respect to US because US is not going to give any technology to them and they don't need it. But there is one big issue. China had said that it will close down the coal power plants. That is what they have said. In fact, they have closed down some of the plants. But they are compelled to reopen it now.
Yeah, but they have increased production. They have increased production this year.
Correct. So that way, when the production picks up after this pandemic, they will be compelled to open some of these coal plants. But 2060 is again a political statement. Nobody knows what will happen in 2060. So the life of a coal power plant is about 50 years. So some of these old plants, India also may have to close in any case. But the question is whether China will build new power plants. This is the question. Probably they will not. Whether India can manage without new power plants, in my opinion, no. We will have to build new power plants, coal-based power plants, or gas-based power plants, or nuclear power plants. Because nuclear power plants we can't do because of our own constraints.
Exactly. That's the way that we created that problem of liability.
Created the problem. That is right. But I think looking at China's situation, China probably was waiting to see what happens. And then after the meeting, probably they will take their own positions vis-a-vis other nations. With US, they have said they will cooperate. But probably with other nations, they may take a different position. They have already said they will not build any coal-based power plants outside China. That they have already said, and they will not do that. Some of their friends will suffer from that, but they will not do that. And then whether they will help them to build nuclear power plants, most likely yes.
Right.
Most likely yes.
No, but the Chinese used to take a position of leadership of developing countries, and
Yes.
this in Glasgow, what happened was India took on that responsibility.
Right.
What we spoke were all about developing countries' obligations and their
Because
needs. But
only
China
help.
kept away from all that, and now they are
Right.
saying United States. That means they are shifting their position from a champion of developing countries to some kind of a collaboration with the United States.
I have a feeling also the same thing. You could be right. Because it is not only related to climate, because it is related to everything actually. And that could also be a political statement saying that we are a superpower now and let us try to discuss as superpower to superpower. That could be the statement perhaps.
Exactly.
But will US accept that? I don't think so. So we don't know.
If we were to conclude our discussion, in other words, unless technology develops for sequestration of carbon dioxide and are able to use technology to capture and use, etc., you cannot really sleep well for the future generations, because
Right.
all these tricks and all these arrangements and promises and pledges may not result in anything. And so we probably may have to wait. And that period is what I think people are covering by declaring this and declaring that. But the eventual solution has to be a technological solution. That's what
I think so too. I think so too. And that technology should be developed by the developed world, given free to the developing world. That is how it should be.
right. That we have been asking since Rio.
Right.
Technology.
Right.
They said we'll
Now,
give you they said we'll give you the address of the company. Go and buy it from them.
correct. No, but my own feeling as an individual who has been observing this, my own feeling is something really will happen on the carbon capture and conversion within a decade. That is a way in which the businesses are moving up, and also there will be an element of cost increase in this, but that we will see what happens. But it is likely to happen, in my opinion. In one decade, there will be really a sizable level of operation of carbon capture. But before I complete this, I will say the easiest way to manage CO2 management in the atmosphere is to recycle the CO2 in the sea. Ocean, if
Do
you
you have the
collect,
technology for that? Do you have the technology for that?
that is also technology is under development. It will happen. And if you recycle CO2 from the sea, enough quantity of CO2 from the sea for withdrawal of what is existing in the atmosphere now, there's about 470 tons, billion tons, and then continuously this, then sea will become the biggest CO2 sink as it was before the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
That is what is going to happen, according to me.
Okay. So in that hope, let us conclude our discussion.
Right,
Things
right.
are not looking any brighter than before, but there are many new avenues have been explored, and that much we can give credit to Glasgow. And all
Correct.
the activities that have taken place, the NGOs initiatives, they are pushing for various things. So it was like a festival. How many days they were in Glasgow doing all this? So it must have a cumulative impact psychologically on people and also on the actual situation. Let us hope. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your analysis and being
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
all the very best. Thank you.